this is why my job is important. I get to work with technology and make customers, their assets, their visitors, and their reputation safer. So there's a lot of purposeful work that we do, but we've historically focused on the widgets, the service, and the product, and we've not done a very good job of the storytelling of the human element of it. I think the industry's trying to get a little bit better, but a lot of it's still fairly corporatized. But let's tell some stories about what we do and get the next generation of talent interested in maybe checking out our industry instead of something else.
I'm excited to welcome Tyler Schmoker to Defender, business owner at Winsley, Army veteran, mountaineer, and an impressive background in security. Tyler, welcome to Defender.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm thrilled to be here on a security podcast.
Man, I know we've been talking about doing this podcast for a while, so I'm super stoked that we did it. So I thought we would kind of go through a little bit just in the start on some of your experiences and what prompted you to start Winsley. I'm really interested in that. And then I thought we would just sort of go into, you and I are both active on LinkedIn and talk about why that's a good thing for security professionals.
Sure. So I guess as far as Winsley is concerned, well, maybe to take a step back further. So I started my military career right out of high school, and as a lot of people find themselves as a feeder into the security industry, I was no exception. So I actually had a little bit of a unique career in that I started out active duty, and then I did some paramilitary contracting, and then eventually that evolved into corporate security, starting in lower level positions, account manager, site manager, security officer, those types of roles when the economy was a little bit rough, and those were the jobs that I could get. And then eventually within those organizational pipelines, I continued to progress and to eventually reaching the point of like a vice president within the security technology DevOps. But I've also worked within PMO at a global level for a large security firm. And really what prompted my transition into entrepreneurship is a little bit twofold. So it's kind of part of a larger theme of consolidation that's been happening within the industry on the technology, on the integration, as well as on the man guarding side, where a lot of my time was spent. And, I saw it as an opportunity to, I'd been with a company that I was with for like 9 years. It was a great time. I would have probably stayed there for the rest of my career. And it was one of the more public, large and public acquisitions within the security industry a few years back. I'd been offered a role to stay there, just kind of looked at the atmospherics and decided, you know what, I'm going to wish you guys the best. I don't think it's the right fit for me. So I'm going to go on and try something else. So found myself in a vice president role of DevOps and working in security, domain specific technologies development for a couple of years. And my wife and I just started talking and said, we've always talked about if I could run my own consultancy or run my own business. So obviously we figured out our budgets. We basically gotten rid of all of our debts. So I kind of had a runway to do it. And here I find myself in my early 40s. It's like, now's the time. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. The statistics say it won't, but if you don't try, you never know. And so now's the time to try. And I always had the theory that, the security industry is always hiring. So if it doesn't work out, I'm sure that I'll be able to put bread on the table still. So figured now is the time. And so I've been at it for about a year with my consultancy, Winsley. So I like to clarify that it's not security consultancy. It's management consultancy for the security industry. So if you're looking for someone to help advise you on your camera configurations and on your fences, go find a CPP. But if you're looking for someone to help with guerrilla marketing, with organizational design, with organizational change management, efficiency studies, those types of things, executive consulting, domain specific to the security side or the security industry, but with a business focus and an efficiency focus, then maybe I'm your guy. So we've been doing that. And then here recently formed a joint venture with a partner and also some significant backing. So now we're running a second startup within the maritime defense space for logistics support for operations and training. So that's a whole nother frontier that is kind of an extension of the security industry, and that it's still supporting national defense and security interests, but just in a slightly different venue, and kind of leveraging back on some of my previous military experience. So it's called Maritime Support Concepts, and we run a full service page for that as well. And you see content pushing out for that on LinkedIn as well. So that's
Yeah,
kind of the trifecta of what I've got going on right now.
it's a lot. So
Yeah,
it definitely keeps you busy.
certainly.
So in terms of just what your experience is within LinkedIn and doing marketing and sort of attaching that specifically for the security industry, which you and I both focus on, what's your takeaway so far in terms of people's involvement in that, and maybe some of the things that keep them from experiencing the benefits of being active?
So I think that the security industry has a very strong culture and a strong identity. And I think, and again, this is my theory, of course, but I think a lot of it's drawn from some of our feeder professions. You have a lot of ex-military, retired military people such as myself, a lot
Yeah,
of law enforcement folks, intelligence agency, government, three-letter agency types of folks. And I think it's always so culturally, I think a lot of us come into the security industry as like a second leg of our professional careers in a lot of cases, and we bring with us that kind of conservative culture that really extends into the digital domain as well. So what I've seen from like a marketing and a branding perspective through social media, and I would say that LinkedIn is really the platform or drug of choice of the security industry above the other ones,
yeah,
and I tend to leverage LinkedIn more heavily than the other socials as well. But there's still very much a conservative mindset when it comes to um, LinkedIn or social media branding and marketing, and dare I say it, even self promotion for individual professionals. And so with that, I think that there's still a lot of reservation about, well, I can't do that because what will my colleagues think? And I can say that I've been pretty active and proactive with LinkedIn as a tool over the last 4 years. It's improved considerably, and I can't wait to see what it looks like in the next 4 years, because what it's doing, in my view, it's democratizing information and it's democratizing influence. Not to say that our legacy leaders and thought leaders within the profession through traditional channels aren't important. They're still all important to us and contributing to the collective thought of the industry and the security industry zeitgeist. But I think that this is an opportunity to get some new strong voices into that ether and presenting some new ideas, because we fancy ourselves being a very innovative, thought forward industry. But I think that in order to do that, we have to be a little bit more inclusive with the totality of thought leaders and thinkers that are out there within the profession. And so even if you're not getting the invite to the foretop at Ruth's Chris because you're not part of that crew or you're not at that level, tools like LinkedIn and social media, through repetition and frequency, you can really start to make a name for yourself, to where your words carry weight and you can kind of influence the outcomes within an industry. And I think that that's fantastic.
yeah. Well, that's a great point. There's a lot to unpack there too, because if you think about it, so you have the old guard and the way things have been done for such a long time within industry trade shows and the organizations behind those. And you and I were talking about that a little bit ago, and it's like, before we got on camera, and it's like the system that's been on is, it's been going that way for like 50 years. And so LinkedIn comes around, and like a lot of industries is being disrupted by social media in a lot of ways. But the way they do social media is basically the exact same way they do everything else. So they basically just show the kind of trade show material on LinkedIn, right?
Infomercials, 90s
Yeah,
infomercials.
yeah. So you're like, no, 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 no. So I think you're right that it does sort of have a larger table, and people can put in the work, right? So if you put in a lot of work, then, well, hopefully, depending on how algorithms are treating you that day, um, that's a whole nother subject. But as we continue to go down this line, we're like looking for how much work can you put in there? What's your voice? What are you talking about? How are you approaching the industry, and what you have to add to help people, right? So I think that is kind of cool that people can come from a lot of different backgrounds, and like here you and I are talking, right? We're just chatting about our experiences, what we see in the industry, and both entrepreneurs, both looking at things from maybe a different perspective that somebody who's been working at a large manufacturer or a large media corporation would have. So it does give some new voices to the discussion, within our community for sure.
Well, the other way that it democratizes influence and access, really, access for influencing and kind of extending the ends of your organization or your philosophies on security or organization, whatever those are, is the cost perspective. I did a post a couple of days about it, and I did it like post GSX, and obviously there's still significant value in conferences like ISC West and
Absolutely. Yeah.
GSX and all the rest. You get to go and break bread with people and have some drinks and have the sidebar conversations. And in some cases, you're now with social media, you're able to put those in real life faces to the names or the people that through an avatar in some cases. So that's a really cool component. But I did a breakdown. So I did essentially my version of a virtual booth at GSX, because I know that there's been some figures within social media who have been talking a lot about the value of GSX booths on the expo floor in particular this year, and is there value, do you get ROI? And then of course, being at the conference, I heard a lot of discussions about, well, you have this big beautiful booth, you fly all your people in, it's thousands and thousands of dollars, are you getting ROI off that? Well, I think for most people the short answer is maybe no, and I only say that because you get a lot of things that start to incubate at those conferences, but it's not like you're going to go end to end and close a multi-million-dollar national account. That's not going to happen. But what it does is it starts to establish or solidify those relationships, and it makes it so that you're memorable, so that as those opportunities come up, as those RFPs come up, as those special task orders for consulting work or whatever come up, they might think of you. So I basically posted from Sunday to Thursday, same parameters as the conference itself, right?
Okay.
And so what I did then is I calculated how many views that I got through those 9 posts that I did over the course of the conference. It ended up being just shy of like 20,000 views. But then I was able to go through analytics and distill down to how much of that industry demographics was to security and investigations industry. And I think that I'd have to go back and look at my data, but it was somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 views. And then I figured, well, I pay for a premium subscription. I calculated it out prorated based off number of times I posted a year. And I figured out that with my subscription, the cost of posting, it was about an hour and a half of my time for 9 posts. Plus, it was about $3.60 against my paid subscription on LinkedIn, and for that, I got around 4,000 views. And so, is that a replacement for having a booth on the floor at GSX? Absolutely not. But for an individual owner operator like you or me, that's a way to kind of take advantage and still leverage what you can, where maybe you're not as capital heavy, you don't have a full marketing team, you can take advantage of creativity and guerrilla marketing, and then also you're augmenting that by being at the event, right? So that's just
Right.
an example of where it democratizes information and access for people in new ways, where you don't have to be part of a VC backed organization to promote yourself or your goods and services.
No, using that as a backdrop, um, that's perfect. I mean, that's what everybody should be doing. So it's that force multiplication too. With if an organization is flying out, 100 people to man a giant booth, they're spending millions of dollars doing that,
Right.
and yet they're taking a picture at the booth, but all of the different individuals walking around that floor have the potential to, aggregately push that out on social media. No, I don't really see anyone really taking advantage of that. No, I just gave them a great idea, right? So it's like having that information live where you're showing the value that you're showing to the end users that can make it. But you think about how many people within the industry aren't there. And
Right.
that's what it always boiled down to. Like I would go to the show and a lot of the folks that I knew didn't go, and I'd be like, well, here's sort of boiled down of what was out there, what was good, what was bad. And so people always like that. You sort of give them a quick, um, read on the event. But outside of that, um, it's good for an end user, meaning a person who's going to be actually using the products, security professional. But it's sort of like, I think after a while it does become sort of a blur because you're just going from booth, but there's no way you can see it all. So you really have to map out what you're going to see anyway.
Right.
And so a lot of the new guys are out there. They're sort of in the back 40. They're off a little ways where they might not be getting the traction, the foot traffic over there. And so that's where they can make a huge difference. They're there at the event, walking around, seeing what's out there, and sort of reporting back. So anyway, there's a lot of ways to maximize those events, but not just doing it the way it's always been done. It's like pretending the internet doesn't exist, where you're just there isolated, right? Although usually the connections are pretty bad, so that's
Right.
one big challenge when you're there.
Right. Well, the other thing too that I noticed is that I would say that this year attending GSX in Orlando was my most productive year going there. And in large part, it's because I'll say that I saturate the security feed on LinkedIn a little bit because I'm one of the few people who's out there every day. And also one of the few people that is also writing content that's to a mainstream audience with some security tie-ins. So from a practitioner perspective, don't expect to come to my content, and every now and then I'll put some detail bombs out there, but by and large it's a little bit more based on culture and philosophy and familiarity just to get a mainstream audience interested in it. But one of the things that I found is that because I'm pretty much on a daily repetition of things that I do on the platform, when I go to an event like GSX now, I'm not frantically running to every booth handing out business cards because the majority of the people on the floor know who I am. So instead, now, because I've done that work throughout the year before the event, when I go to those events, usually I've got a lot of my meetings lined up where I have gaps. I take in the educational sessions. And then also, just by being there and already having had my billboard out all year, I take a lot more inbound. I'm not chasing people with business cards hoping they remember me. For better or worse, most folks already know who I am. It's just a matter of, do they want to approach me and maybe we can do some business or maybe we can collaborate on a project. So it's kind of front loading some of that work so it's not quite as exhausting of an experience when you get there and being overwhelmed, particularly when you're new to the industry and you don't know everyone yet. It's a good way to kind of front load that familiarity so that when you actually have that rare and precious time where we're all kind of together for 3 or 4 days, you can actually get some stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the investment. So you're
Right.
saying, you got the digital and the physical kind of coordinating, but if you didn't front load that on the digital, where you're spending a year kind of building that, and you have sort of a theme, right? Is the best way I could put that. So the people who like that are coming and they're sort of following that feed. Most people lurk, right? They don't
Right.
like and comment. That's always one thing that's a challenge.
97% statistically on LinkedIn lurk, right? And
Yeah. So you're like, all right, great. Um, but what's interesting is you put that work in, and so if you're doing that, your daily average bumps up pretty decent, right? So you're kind of keeping this sort of watermark. Um, and I don't know where you're at, but if you're just posting regularly on LinkedIn, you'll probably be around 1,000 impressions pretty consistently. And then you go to an event, and then like you said, now you've sort of loaded that, and now you go out there and you're filming material, and now that goes out and that even goes bigger. So that's another aspect of it, is that you're going out physically. Not only are you meeting all those people, exchanging cards, and people are like, oh, hey, I know Tyler, but you're also doing some material. You're doing content creation, and then you're feeding that back out, and then that goes up kind of a little bit of a hockey stick while you're doing that. And so there's those windows.
Well, you're staking your claim on your digital real estate to start with. And even if you're out, in the middle of Nebraska on the frontier and you just have your wife and kids and trying to make a farm, that's where you start. And then from there, through that repetition and those iterations, that's where you get your compounding network interest. And to your point, yeah, I mean, I run between 1,000 and 2,000 impressions per post. It used to be a little bit more, but the algorithm ebbs and flows a little bit. But my day two posts. So I counted Sunday because of Texas night and all of that goodness. So people were posting for that. But my day two, when I actually got to the expo hall, I had a piece of cardboard that I used and I made a riff from Guy with Sign.
Yeah.
That's kind of a big deal on Instagram. And so I held that up and got a perfect stranger to take my picture. And he looked at me a little bit weird. But that post, I think it's over 11,000 views now and it's still running. And it was a $1 piece of cardboard and a little bit of creativity. And I didn't even put the text on it so I can reuse it. So,
Oh, there you go. Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like just a little bit of creativity goes a long way, and just thinking about things in that way, and that sort of gets to, there's a lot of different folks that make up the security industry, right? So you have manufacturers. We kind of talked about that. They put a lot of investment in getting these booths from these organizations that are running these shows, and so it's a hefty lift to get everyone there, and then distributors, um, consultants, and then of course the end customers that are going there. Now, what's your advice for somebody who I think most people that I know of that I've talked to here on Defender have a hard time, Tyler, of number one, just getting, public speaking is like the biggest fear ever, right? Number one. So if you can get over that, and then I let them know, don't worry, it's there's never a worry about saying something on here, and it's not going to go out, live anyway.
right.
But the biggest issue I think is a lot of kind of reserved on, well, I don't want to say something I shouldn't, or do I need to get this approved from my corporate before I do something. So I think a lot of folks that are in the security industry that would have some awesome things to contribute overall. And this is what I really want is to talk to them. Is the big challenge is they feel like I think that their company is going to have a problem with it. They could get in trouble for it. Something could happen in that way. So what's your thought on that?
So, and I've actually worked with some clients on this before. So I always put the disclaimer out there to check with your HR and your manager about what the social media policy is for your organization as far as using brands, as far as posting, all of those types of things, because, every organization's a little bit different. And then obviously we all know, or we should know as security professionals, we're not doing leaks on anything that's like intelligence related, anything with classifications, anything that's proprietary information, IP, all of those types of things. But I'm here to tell everyone that even considering those elements with some policy restrictions that might exist within an organization, as well as making sure that you're not leaking like competitive intelligence or client information and things like that. I've been posting regularly for like 4 years now, and I've never had any such leak. There's plenty to talk to without, or to talk about and talk to, and topics to talk to where you're not compromising specific information. So, I mean, obviously, you want to maintain that level of professionalism so that you're not calling specific organizations out and causing reputational brand damage, those types of things. So I always speak in very general terms and to very generalized instances where people can get like the learning moments out of it and get some information about it. And in some cases, maybe the people that it applies to, they stop and think about it and reflect. But again, you're not putting people on blast or organizations on blast publicly, because ultimately it's all about how can we share information and provide feedback in a way that's going to be productive so that we can all evolve together. Beyond that, though, and kind of, I don't know if it's statutory is maybe not the right word, but like policy restrictions, I tend to think it's a little bit more concerns about the social culture that exists within the industry more so than people worried about the policy. Those two things are closely related, because I'll tell you what, when I started posting fairly pop culture security content with a little or security content with like a unique spin on it, it was rough for quite some time. I mean, I've been laughed at, I've been trolled, I've been ridiculed, all those things. But over time, it starts to normalize. And of course, there are those points along the way where it's like I hit post, and it's like, am I a total idiot here? Or am I going to ruin my career and wreck my reputation? And folks have said to me, well, a CSO is never going to take you seriously. You're posting this type of stuff. But over time, you're normalizing it. And you can always look to other industries where they've been a little bit more forward in leveraging social media as a strategic communications enabler, and you see the stuff that they're doing. And I always use the example, if you look at a Super Bowl ad spot and you have a Doritos commercial, most likely it's going to be ridiculous, right?
Right.
But it's going to be memorable. And it's still, I don't know, it's a multi-billion-dollar organization and products in every country and everyone knows the brand. So you have to think about it that way. It's like businesses are being very creative in how they're promoting their products and services, but the security industry is kind of stuck really tight to, well, this is a trade show and this is our 90s infomercial, or we're going to post a post before GSX and it's going to read like an internal employee memo or a newsletter. And you see what the result is when you get that. You get those posts on LinkedIn from the company that looks like an internal employee memo. You have 10, 15, 20 internal employees that like it because they think they have to. But that's a self-licking ice cream cone. The goal of it isn't to get all the people that already know you to like it. It's to reach those people who don't know you. More importantly, your consumers and your end users. And here's a big one for the security industry. A lot of our end users and our consumers, they're not in security. So how do we reach them? Or how do we reach the top talent Gen Zs where they consume information in the socials if we're posting 90s styles infomercials that are adapted to LinkedIn? It's like, we're not going to reach those people. So if we're talking about getting to top talent and getting the next generation into the industry, we have to meet them where they are.
That's a good point. I think for me, my North Star is just putting authentic things out there. I think that's one of the gotchas is, man, you look at a post or especially a video or something, it just comes off, man, it's just like, come on, this is so fake, right? And so you can pull from other industries, like SaaS is a great example, since our industry is changing right now because, there's a lot of Silicon Valley companies that came in and completely changed up what was happening, just 5 years ago.
Right.
So that's a good point in that there's sort of this mash between Silicon Valley kind of thought processes, and that includes marketing, and then sort of our old school sort of electronic security, right? And so that is sort of being updated. But, it always comes down to what's the value, though, to the target audience, if you want to put it that way, like the people who you're trying to reach. Are you putting information out there that's just cringy, or are we trying to connect with them in a real way where, I know there's different ways of marketing, and I know there's things that you can't do anything without attention. But at the same time, you just want to have the information you put out there, at least I do, that just comes off, this is just who I am. This is realistic. And you're trying to sort of, in some ways, set the record straight. Like, this is what I believe. This is what I'm trying to do. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is because people think when they put something out on LinkedIn or anywhere that it's being seen by all these people, and it's not. You can have,
you get a subset,
50,000.
you get a fraction. You get a
tiny,
fraction of your network.
And that's what's lowered, Tyler. So we could talk about it. Like last year, I post something, it would go much larger, right? And what happened is, where if you had, I don't know, 5,000 or 30,000, I don't care how many people, you can have 100,000. It'll only squeak out a little bit at a time to see how well it does. And this is always the kiss of death for any post, is that if it doesn't see engagement within the first, minute or so, especially comments and things like that, it just goes nowhere and just, goes back down.
Right.
So that's really, they've fine tuned that process pretty extensively. So that's one of the big issues I think for a lot of people is that if they post something, don't worry, it's not being seen by that many people. Unless it's really ridiculous, maybe you'll get some attention. But most of the stuff that we put out there on LinkedIn, maybe you'll get a fraction of people that are within your circle to see it anyway. So it takes
Hmm.
a lot of work, like you were saying, doing it repetition and having a system in place to get that out there. That's a lot of work, believe it or not. And plus, you're having to think of different things. You can't just post the same thing over and over again.
Right.
Kind
Right.
of gets a little boring.
Yeah, I mean, you can acquire audience, but can you attain or retain an audience is a big part of it. And are you able to educate, inform, and inspire your audience, right? So I think in the case of the security industry, there's a lot of inform and educate, but I think entertain has always been a little bit of a taboo. So hopefully we can change some of that and get some more people interested in it. And to your point, yeah, it's if a post comes out of the chute, even if you have 10,000 people in your network, if it's not getting engagements, like you're going to get a couple hundred views on it. And that's where it's going to stop. So you have to be very deliberate in your content strategy about what types of content you're posting on what days, as well as times of days that you post. And if you're doing multiple posts a day, you want to have some space in between for your distribution, because if you do 3 posts back to back and said, "Oh, I'm good for today," or "I post 5 posts back to back for the week," you've basically cannibalized yourself. So you have to spread those things out. But fortunately, there's scheduling tools to do that. And then another element too is that people don't necessarily consider what is your audience doing at the time of release of a post. For example, I do some longer form posts where I'll max out characters because I really want to get into a subject within a post. But I'm not going to post that post on a Monday morning. Why? Because people are busy on Monday morning. I may save that for like the Thursday or Friday slide when people are kind of starting to scale down for the week and have a little bit more time. Whereas at the beginning of the week, I might do something that's a little bit more punchy, maybe a little bit funnier to get people laughing a little bit on a Monday morning when they don't want to laugh, because maybe that's kind of a contribution to the community, but it's something that someone can consume pretty quickly, because they say that the average LinkedIn user statistically spends about 7 minutes on the platform today. I obviously spend a lot more time than that on the platform, but you have to figure that in that scroll, I mean, time kills, right? And speed kills. So basically, you have to be able to grab people quickly, to stop the scroll with visuals, get them in the hook line so that they'll read more, retain them till the end of the content, and then hopefully you'll get a reaction and maybe even a comment out of them.
Yeah, there's a couple things on that. Like, the first one is that time of day totally matters, and then the posting through these systems. So this is kind of a gotcha, and I'm noticing right now. And I think this might be a very new thing where I use an app so I can just push, once, right, and it goes out to all the different feeds out there. And again, like LinkedIn is sort of pretty much my 99. That's pretty much it that I spend time on. But if I post through that app, and number one, if you post a link, it gets killed. If you if you post content through the app and then you don't go in there and do anything, it doesn't go anywhere because they want to see you in the platform. And you're probably talking 30 minutes at a minimum that the algorithm's looking for your engagement. And then also you have to comment and engage with other people, right? So this isn't like a one way, you're not just doing an advert that's going out there. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And that's what's great about LinkedIn is it's really about kind of creating a loop, because you're trying to have a conversation and maybe thought provoke on something that's interesting for all the other security professionals out there. Um, but unfortunately, it doesn't go anywhere unless we all do engage on there and we sort of participate in the algorithm. So that is one of the biggest challenges. Is like you're saying, if people are on there 7 minutes a day, they probably didn't see it. Number one, so don't feel bad. And then the other thing is, if they do, they just kind of scroll through. And so unless it had something kind of eye catching or interesting, they're just feeding through and not really paying attention, I think, to a lot of the content that's out there.
Well, where you can start to kind of, we talked a little bit before about, okay, so you have your digital real estate, and that's basically a post, right? And it's the equivalent of handing business cards out at a conference every day a year. So even if only 100 people see it and you're down on yourself, it's really hard to hand out 100 business cards at a conference. So you have to think about it. You have to think about it through that lens. And now you think, well, through LinkedIn, I'm at GSX 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And on average, I hand out 1,500 to 3,000 business cards every single day. And just like the real ones you hand out, 99 of those aren't going to amount to a closed opportunity where you're billing revenue, but all you need is one, and all you need is a few. And especially like as a smaller consultancy, you don't have to have a whole lot of clients. You just need to be able to have those return clients. But then the other thing too is once you have that digital real estate, there's that compounding network interest. So what changes over time and frequency is that, yes, I know some tricks and tips that will get people to stop the scroll a little bit more than they might for other content, and things that will catch eyes, and then hooks that are perfectly placed to where I'm not giving up too much too early so that I get a click to see more. But then the other thing that you can do too is you start to, well, you can bump the algorithm a little bit, right? And do things like right after that post. And even if you have it on a schedule, you can do things to bump the algorithm. So like liking your own post, people, is okay. You should like your own post. And when you comment on someone's stuff, like your comment. And it's not because you're in love with yourself. It's like you're doing them the benefit of registering more clicks on that person's piece of content.
Oh yeah.
Or clicking on your own piece of content. And I'm sure that you've probably seen this, David, being a little bit of a student of LinkedIn now. You see some of the bigger creators, and I certainly do it. They'll go down and they'll drop 4 or 5 different quotes.
I sure did. Yeah.
From someone else. So what you're doing there, so like I look at it this way. If I go into a post in the morning and I have it set for 7 a.m., as soon as that post hits, I'm going to like it with my own avatar. I'm going to switch over. I'm going to like it with my Winsley Company avatar. Then I'm going to repost it through my Winsley Company avatar. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to use my company avatars, my maritime support concepts, and my Winsley avatar. I'm going to drop a quick write-up down in the comments, those external comments or those external links that you were talking about, trying to say, if you want to learn more about this, check out our website. Those are going to get buried, but they still count for comments that go in there. And it's a way that you're not paying the external link tax by embedding it in a post, because essentially LinkedIn's goal is to keep you from off-platforming people. But obviously you want to get people to your stuff eventually, whether it's your business web page, your YouTube page, whether it's your podcast link tree or whatever that is. At some point, you want to off-platform people into your ecosystem. So it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game with LinkedIn where they're trying to limit it, but they know that if they don't allow it in some form, they're going to start to lose users. So there's just kind of that balance of making it happen. So now I've dropped those company plugs down where I didn't spam and I didn't put it in people's face in the post that I'm just promoting my company. I talk about something of general interest, general value with no real ask, but I'm going to drop my company down in there. And if they start to like my content, see it, and they have a consulting engagement, well, they see that I'm posting that down there every day. And then after you've posted those inspirational quotes down in there, plus a couple of posts about your companies and where you can find us and those types of things, and maybe even referencing the post you did yesterday. Hey, if you like this post, you'll like this one. Include the link for that. Now you have about 10 different comments that are within your post down below in the comments that you can now take your avatar, you go and click those. And then you do it again with your company avatar. So within 5 minutes of my post hitting in the feed, even if no one else has touched it yet, I've already registered the better part of 10 comments plus around 20 clicks on it. So it's telling the algorithm, this is a post that's getting response. And then within the first hour, I'm usually 30 or 40 clicks on it. And then it'll evolve throughout the day.
Yeah. And that's what's so funny though, is like because I did a bunch of testing. I don't know, about start of the year until about June. I was doing a ton of testing on LinkedIn to see what was still working, and it's always changing. And to your point, like, you'd put the link in the comment. And it was kind of like a great workaround for that issue. And now they've started hiding the link in the comment, right? So there's always like a little cat and mouse game going back and forth between what you can and can't do. And like you said, they just want to keep you on platform. So that being said, to all the defenders out there, is the only way this works is really to have some engagement, and honestly, just the whole idea of being on there is to actually let you know what's on Defender.Video, and then they're going to see the content. So that's one thing I've been trying to think about, just in terms of how I'm putting this together, is have more content, or like I'll do a short off this video, for example, just to let people know, hey, the latest podcast has dropped. Tyler's on, and we're talking about X, right? And I'll do a small clip from that called the Rewind. And then that is to get them over to see the full podcast, and they can watch that, or they can listen to it, whatever kind of works for them, especially with being at work. Usually you can do earpods or something, but watching a video is probably not awesome.
Right.
But that's really what it's all about, is like trying to figure out what you can and can't do and what's working right now. And this, to your point earlier too, it's like all the big kind of content folks that are out there that have really blown up in the last 4 or 5 years on LinkedIn, they're going through the exact same things, and they're having the exact same challenges where, it's always changing. So I definitely suggest that people go out there and um, put information out there, get more active on LinkedIn, and especially within the security circle, it's a small industry. I mean, it's large, but it's, we're a tight group, and I think it's great because the things that we're talking about are super important, and I think it's a great community. There's no one like security professionals,
Right.
and a lot of people make it up, which is kind of cool too. But what are we doing of value? Like I was kind of talking to you earlier, it's like sort of the way it's been done is these sort of media conglomerates that own a bunch of different industry stuff. They're the ones with the magazines, and they're the ones with the content that's going out. But a lot of them, they haven't done job walks. They haven't walked out there. They haven't designed systems. They haven't managed a security team. They haven't done any of those things. So, um, having voices that are outside of the normal circles, like you and I, and just letting people know, like, hey, we've sort of been there. We've done some of this stuff, and we can definitely help. But for me, like, Defender's just been completely different. Like, I didn't intend on creating this, Tyler. It just sort of happened. And then you're trying to figure out, well, how can I do this more of a full time, you know,
Right.
and put more content out there, because it takes a ton of time to put all this stuff together. Um, and that's been really the biggest challenge, is getting that figured out, because the media company, they got that figured out, up and down, left and right. They have that figured out. But new guys like us kind of trying to put that out there, and getting folks to engage on it. Basically, it's all of us kind of engaging within our own stuff versus the stuff that's created for us. It's kind of how that works. So
But it's amazing how many people see it that might never engage with it. And in fact, some of the clients I've landed, oh, I followed you for years and never liked a thing. So you just never know where it's going
yeah,
to come from. And some of your most rabid fans are never going to buy anything from you. And that's okay
that's true.
too. But
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
there's still capital in what they do, because every time someone shows up to support you, it boosts your signal and it boosts your distribution. And then likewise on the engagement side, you should never be in a situation where you're just doing one for one liking and supporting of things, especially if you're starting to get behind things that you're not necessarily aligned with. But,
Yeah.
there's a community component to it as well, is that you need to have friends in your corner that are going to help you boost signal when you need it. And then eventually you get to a point where your content will stand on its own.
Yeah, no, it's super important that there's sort of a group of us, right, that are out there, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really what we're trying to do is create an environment where people are trading information and sort of that human element where we're comparing notes, and that's supposed to help each other. But that's why video is so great, right? Because we can cover a lot of ground very quickly through video versus
Right.
someone's not going to read, 50 pages. That would probably be at least what we're doing here. So, um, written content's great. I love writing, been writing forever, but I think video is a great way of reaching people.
Well, the thing
So,
too
well,
is like where you have long form, like what with we're doing today. I mean,
mhm.
it's not hard to make a lot of different shorts that you can leverage a lot of different ways and add a few quick talking points to it. Like you get tons of, there's a lot of mundane things, well, that security practitioners think is mundane in their daily life. That's actually valuable content for someone. I mean, that's kind of the premise of YouTube. I mean,
Yeah,
there's not an instructional video for assembling any piece of IKEA furniture that you can't find on YouTube, and
that's so true.
various other things as well. So I think that it's important to recognize that there's a consumer out there for darn near everything. So don't devalue your knowledge and your daily life and routine and what you can offer to the industry thought or zeitgeist or even end users that aren't in the industry but are kind of looking to see how the sausage is made. You can help them by saying, here's what a security patrol looks like, or here's what, pulling wire looks like, or whatever. And then I think you can kind of get into the vocational and occupational part of it too, with like storytelling. And, this is why my job is important. I get to work with technology and make customers, their assets, their visitors, and their reputation safer. So there's a lot of purposeful work that we do, but we've
Yeah,
we've historically focused on the widgets, the service, and the product, and we've not done a very good job of the storytelling of the human element of it. I think the industry's trying to get a little bit better, but a lot of it's still fairly corporatized. But let's tell some stories about what we do and get the next generation of talent interested in maybe checking out our industry instead of something else.
yeah. I mean, you look at, I think the security industry does kind of struggle with that too, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of just getting new talent and getting people over, and that's really sort of what the old guard is supposed to be doing. Is you're supposed to be sort of getting the new folks in there and getting them excited about the industry, but you can't do that without storytelling. So that
Right.
means, just telling your why. Like, what do we do? Why do we do it? And the security industry is changing big time, where there's a lot of technology that's been inserted into the industry, and at the same time, there's no replacement for sort of the human element uh, within our industry, and that has to be taught. So there's a lot there, and I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm seeing more people do it, but that's really, I guess, one of the biggest goals for here, for me at least on Defender, is just getting everyone to sort of talk about that and share those experiences, because there's a whole new generation coming up. They have no clue. They're looking at doing, you know, game videos or something right now.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not on their radar. But
Right.
maybe if you're posting content where they're at, and to your point earlier, that there's a lot of people that are within the buying phase of security products. So it's like, okay, you're focused on one spot, but there's a lot of different people within that. So there's a lot of just business elements too that I think would make sense for a manufacturer, a system integrator, and then of course the end customers, the security professionals that are actually using the products to show, here's how we do it. This is what's important to us. This is what we're trying to protect, without giving away any secrets, of course.
Right. Well, and at the same time, you're starting to establish some characters within the space that people that aren't in the space can be interested in. And you do that by layering in like some pop culture elements and some things that aren't necessarily quite so laser focused on security. And you might appreciate this. So I listen to quite a few like veteran, military veteran genre podcasts. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, I retired from the Army. So, but the thing is, a lot of their listeners do not come from the military. It's just people who are interested in the characters and the
right.
stories, whether it's, Tim Kennedy or Jocko or Sean Ryan or all these other people with all these shows and all these different like multimedia channels and vectors to distribute their information and ultimately promote their businesses, but they're also providing a value add to a general audience, which is part of it. You have to give some things away for free. The ultimate goal is to give away some valuable stuff in front of the paywall. And then you have that exclusive stuff that's behind the paywall, not because we're insidious or greedy, but because everybody's got to make a living. That's the reality of the situation. So at some point
Yeah.
you have to charge for something. Otherwise, you're not going to keep it going as a public utility, right?
Well,
But
that's a hard thing. I've struggled with that.
right, right,
You want to do it all for free and put it out there, and you're like, oh my gosh, if they only knew how long it takes to do
right,
this editing. But you like to do it because you see a need for it.
right.
And like I said, the folks that are doing stuff, the manufacturers have no problem spending ridiculous amounts of money a lot of times for ads and things where you're trying to put information, like you said, it's all about value.
Right.
So if you're not doing anything value, then okay, great, But
Right.
if you're trying to put information out there that's supposed to benefit um, sort of your circle, that's the way I would look at it.
Well, it's the circle plus it's a broader audience. So I often refer to it as, and I mean, it's a little bit critical of the industry, and I'm in it, so I'm being critical of myself as well. I think in some ways, in how we market and how we brand or don't, it puts us in the backwater as far as a sector, right? Where we don't get the same type of interest that like pure play tech gets, or manufacturing, or some of these other verticals that people just, they don't even know about it. Like people know about the Marine Corps because they have an excellent history. Plus, they do great storytelling and ridiculously good ad campaigns. They always meet recruitment numbers. There's a reason for that. There's a lot of crossover into like physical security work where you could work in intelligence, physical security, patrol, high value asset protection, high value individual protection. There's a lot of really cool stuff. We don't ever talk about it. We just get people coming out of the military as, or law enforcement as a second career. But if you're able to tell stories and have broaden your range of topics so that you can interest a general audience, that's how you start to get more momentum. And like I was saying, I think, Sean Ryan is one of the biggest podcasts on the planet right now. And it started out as he was interviewing his special operator friends, but then they started having people who talked about the grid, and then they have political topics, and they have influence and information and all these other things. And it's like, so I encourage the security industry, whether you're doing it as a podcast like you, where you're having some outliers in that might bring in a little bit of a different audience, and then hopefully you retain them, or if you're even doing it in your content, like where you're layering in like references that are recognizable and resonate with a general audience that hasn't been in security for 15 or 20 years. Those are the types of things that gets that bigger audience, because if you can get your topic, your product, your service, your subject matter in the mainstream to where it trends, there's money there. Absolutely. If you're one of the biggest companies in the world and nobody has ever heard of it, or like me, I worked for one for 9 years and my family could never remember the name of it. And at one point, I think it was the biggest or the third largest employer in the world by headcount. It's like, we're obviously not marketing right. It's like we used to say, well, we don't want people to know what we do. Well, newsflash, in this day and age, everyone's got meta. Unless you're living in a cabin in the woods and you're not really relevant to anything, there's meta on you. People can find you if they want to find you. So control your narrative and form that to your benefit, whether it's your business or your personal brand.
So that's kind of gives us a good view of LinkedIn and using these tools and why it's important. And that's always changing. Again, these algorithms are changing. So you have to really kind of stay up on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's definitely a lot of value for the security professional to go in there and engage with other security professionals, share information, be a voice and contributor to others that are going to learn from your experiences too. There's a lot of guys that have been doing this for a long time, and so they have a lot of value in the information and things that they could bring to the table. So that's a big piece of it.
And I would say, even from a personal perspective, if you want to challenge yourself and kind of get comfortable with yourself and stand on your own 2 feet, start posting on LinkedIn and take everything in that comes along with that, from the support to the criticisms to the critiques, but then you start to see those material benefits that come in. Because again, I was fairly early in posting some of the way that I post and using some more bigger social type of techniques, but injecting them into the security industry that, certainly I still even get some criticism that, it's unprofessional or this or that. But I can tell you that the access that I've gained off of having done it is far outweighs any of the kind of the downsides, and people who aren't necessarily a fan of it. I mean, I can message pretty much all of the biggest executives of the biggest companies and they'll respond.
Yeah, like that goes a long way for sure.
Right.
You're creating your own. You're basically you're controlling your own destiny.
Right.
By doing that. So
when it's transferable too, it's like a digital 401k, because again, you have that compounding network interest. And even if you decide that ABC Access Control Company isn't for you anymore, and now you're going to go to XYZ Access Control Company, you still keep that capital with you, and you update people where you went. And if you don't have a content strategy that's solely tied to just selling one widget, then that goes with you as well. And then, based on the organization that you work with, I would say that the ones that are going to be a little bit more visionary in terms of like guerrilla marketing and leveraging that are going to be the ones that they set their left and right limits that they're comfortable with as far as policy.
Right.
That's not overly restrictive, but it's within bounds and it's defined. And then if you have an influencer within your organization, that shouldn't be seen as an issue that you need to schedule the talk with them every month to say, well, we saw you're posting on LinkedIn again. It's like, well, yes, but it's getting more reach than your company posts are getting. So how can we co-opt this, and we can coordinate whether it's, maybe some consulting for you, or maybe it's where we're doing some co-branding and there's like a return for doing X amount of posts, like using a personal platform or promoting. So I think there's a lot of different things that companies who are thinking about the low barrier for entry and the power of individual influencers to co-opt with their brands in a way that's, of course, going to be morally, ethically, and reputationally palatable or beneficial. But then within that context, it's like, why can't you leverage your influencers and incentivize those to do those things? Because you have there's individuals within companies that are going to get a lot more views in a year than the company will, and they've got people on staff doing it for them.
That's a normal occurrence for sure. Like if you look at how many people follow a company versus some of the individuals, it's night and day. That's why founder-led growth is sort of a trend, and that's why that's been working, because people want to hear from people. They don't, that's I guess what it really boils down to is people want to hear from people if they have something intelligent to say and they're trying to convey something that is meaningful, right? If they resonate with that, they're gonna tune in.
Right.
Whereas the company stuff is kind of usually company stuff where it's you're not warming up to the company as much as you are an individual. That's just how human nature is.
Right.
And in fact, I think this is just sort of how it is. If someone posts something and it has a picture of a person's face on there, people will stop scrolling because we're just hardwired to look at people and faces. So again, you have that with individuals who are posting material and they're talking about stuff. Some of the stuff is kind of crazy sometimes, where you're like, man, I really don't want to see, just walking around and tell me how, great you are or whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of times, I'm not talking about you. I'm just talking about some of the stuff you see.
Well, maybe me, but sometimes, but
not you. You're good. Hey, mountaineering, that's what's so cool. It's all about a backdrop for me. Like, if I'm going to go and walk around, I want to see, stuff that's out there. And I think that's one of the big things is, being a mountaineer, that's very cool. And it's something you love to do and you're putting your energy into it. And it just shows like, hey, wow, that's a different aspect of Tyler. He's out there and he's doing stuff. He's pushing himself. And so that's an interesting thing, right?
Right. Well, and there's ways that you can weave that into stories too, whether it's project management to plan for a mountaineering trip or, emergency that's no different than emergency management, right?
Yeah.
Or highlighting physical fitness, and maybe I'm out doing runs on a hill, but it's like, but we're security professionals. And what about when we have that that high-rise building evacuation and the elevators go out and you're the Bubba who's got to be going up 50 and down 50 flights of stairs. It's like, so those are things where you can start to kind of inject that, kind of broader mainstream element into it. Because again, especially with like a younger demographics, you get things related about the outdoors and sustainability and physical fitness in there. Boom, you're checking off 3 major blocks. And now we apply that to security industry. And plus we're protecting, people, assets, and reputations for the biggest, most powerful companies in the world. That's a really cool story if we tell it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And if you tie all those things together in a meaningful way, like you were just saying, that's pretty cool. Right.
Right.
So I think that's really the catch, is to do it. And it's just called authenticity. It's being a human being and not being fake out there. So I think that's really what it all boils down to. And then, like you and I were saying, you just sort of, if you're just a normal person, just putting stuff out there, how you feel about something or whatever it is, and you're not trying to be all flashy and do all these crazy things. I just think that really resonates with people. Like I find that a lot of times highly produced stuff, like people will spend $30,000 on a video, dude, and then it goes nowhere. Nobody cares because it's a corporate video. Right. Where somebody goes out with their freaking phone in the background talking about, oh yeah, I'm just over here and I'm fishing right now, but I was thinking about this. You know what I'm saying? So, and that gets a million views.
Like I told you, I had a piece of cardboard. I basically did a rip off of the guy or dude with sign, and I held it up at the entrance of GSX. And I know no one else has ever done that before. And for being willing to stand up and look like an idiot for 2 seconds with a piece of cardboard. I mean, it's running over 11,000 views right now. And so I think that's probably a little bit frustrating or infuriating to establishment, marketing folks, is that, well, this guy's doing this stupid thing. It's like, it's all about connecting with people. And it took me $1 for a piece of cardboard, not even. I think it was free cardboard, and a little bit of embarrassment of grabbing a complete stranger with a puzzled look to take this picture of me in the front of the GSX sign.
But there's an important side of that, though. It's getting past your comfort zone. So
Absolutely.
Most people, dude, 99% of people aren't going to do anything because they just don't want to look stupid.
Right.
Like I said, public speaking freaks people out, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of things like that where not everyone's going to jump out of the airplane.
Right.
So there's got to be people out there that are needed, I guess, to kind of push that a little bit and put themselves out there. And that is a vulnerability, though. You could definitely look really stupid, putting yourself out there and doing something. But what's going to happen? Are they going to, kill you if you look dumb? So you just have to do that. Hopefully not. Obviously, you don't want to damage your reputation, but I think we're our own worst enemies in that we make it such a big deal to put anything out there, put ourselves out there, that we wind up, living a kind of a much reduced life.
It's a Nerf life. I mean, you're living a Nerf life at that point. And it's like, I just decided I didn't want to be the guy that was approaching retirement. I'm like, well, I kind of did okay, but I never really tried. And I don't really know because, again, the industry's always hiring. You can take some risks and take some chances responsibly within whatever your risk tolerance is. But, kind of taking some of those chances on yourself is a good way to get over yourself. And it gets you a little bit closer to self-actualization, right?
Man, you're preaching to the choir. In terms of taking a chance and going out there and starting a business, people have that's the thing. It's like you do a job change and, you're going to get probably 100 likes. But having a business, there's no likes there. You're just doing this grind every day. No one has an idea how hard it can be sometimes. So that's why I want to mention Winsley. It's like, that is putting the chips out and taking a bet, but it's on yourself. Right. And it's a hard thing to do.
Certainly is, especially within an industry that's still fairly closed off from outside consulting. That can be a little bit of a challenge at times, but that anyone that's ever worked with me is like, it's well worth the time. It's like, I'm not going to sell something that I think is junk, but you're right though. The entrepreneurial roller coaster, that's peaks fun. Are a lot higher and the valleys are a lot lower, man, than any other corporate job you'll ever have.
Well, especially if you're trying to change things. Like, I kind of buck the system on, representation, manufacturer reps. And dude, it's just ugly. Like people don't want to change. They don't like something new. They're like, no. And it's a big deal to bring change into an industry that is hard set, like on this way of doing it. It's like, it's like the proverbial wagon wheels in the mud, right? Where they're just in there. And so getting that to turn is a lot of work.
Right.
And but somebody has to try, right? Somebody has to show, hey, what if we did this instead? What if this is a better way of doing it versus the way we've been doing it for the last, well, 70 years, at least for that model. So there's just things like that. I think an entrepreneur a lot of times sees something that needs to be changed,
Mm-hmm.
and that you could do something better if you could just turn the screws a little bit and
Right.
and do that. But if you knew at all, this is a good question for you. If you knew what you were going to get into last year when you did this, and you had the knowledge you have today, would you have done it still?
Yep. Without a
See?
doubt. And I'm still not even sure if it's going to be successful, but I mean, quite honestly, I'm exceeding projections for first year. I was very conservative though. I had no illusions that I was going to fly off to my own private jet on my own private plane after 1 year
Yeah.
as a solopreneur, and that's definitely not been the case. But you're getting those little wins where you land your first contract, or you get a repeat customer, or you're exceeding your quarterly goals on revenue, and you're exceeding on profitability because you kept your costs low. And it's all those things. But then there are those other things that come along with it. Every job that I've ever had, whether it was in the military, paramilitary, or the security industry, even some of the jobs that weren't my favorite, I've learned something from everyone.
Man, isn't that the truth? Exactly.
Yeah,
If you just are a lifetime learner, you're going to be in good shape, because
right.
even if it's hard and it definitely has its ups and downs, like you're saying, but you're learning so much. This is basically like going to an Ivy League school for 4 years,
Right.
getting an MBA within the time you become an entrepreneur, because there's so much to learn about
Yep.
every aspect of business.
Yep.
And I just find that you know people
It's
cut bait a
yeah.
lot earlier than I
Yeah.
have, because it gets crazy, and you're like,
Yep.
you know, yeah,
I mean, yeah, you're going to have some very down days. And the biggest thing is it's isolating at times because you have all these relationships and these organizations that you worked with. And in some cases, you're going to find that some of them were probably just acquaintances, right? And it's not for good or bad or commentary on the people. It just changes. And if you don't have a construct to be interacting, it's harder to kind of keep up with people, and that goes both ways. And even as a solopreneur, at times it's like, you're out here doing your things, but maybe you'll have that day where you're in a down week, and it's a little bit like Maytag Man, to where you don't want to be pestering anyone either. It's like, well, they're busy doing their thing or whatever. But the really empowering part of entrepreneurship that I found, and this is to your point too, it's all the new skill sets that you pick up because you become a CEO, a CFO, a CMO, a CRO. You're your own IT director, and a lot of that happens overnight. And there's going to be days when you're spending half the day trying to sync your calendar with your scheduling tool that's on LinkedIn or something like that. But it's like, I come out of this now, it's like I can start an LLC without blinking an eye now. And
yeah,
I don't need to call LegalZoom. I don't need to do anything, right? I can spin out an LLC pretty quickly in dang near any state I wanted to. I've got multiple LLCs in multiple states. Um, I can make a semi decent website through a no code website that didn't cost me a whole lot of money. I mean, if I've got operating investment in one company right now, capex is like $138. I have a website. I've got thousands of views. I got hundreds of followers already, and we've been a month, and we've already got opportunities in pipeline. So if you kind of keep some of those expenses in place and you don't start hiring everything out and just accept that, all right, buddy, you're in it by yourself for a while, and whatever free help you can get, but you start to establish that, it gives you like a little bit of a safety net to where it's like, you know what, maybe your first month you only made $1,000, But if you only have $138 worth of CapEx because you developed your own website, you're going through a cheap hosting site, maybe you're using a spreadsheet for a balance sheet and you're going to hold off on the QuickBooks or whatever else for now. Those are those ways to it's not hard to make a profitable business. It's a matter of how much gross revenue you're going to get, which comes later with your marketing and your compounding network interest that you gain. But you, if you're pretty prudent, you can run a profitable business. It's not as hard as some business owners would lead you to believe.
No, I think people just want to go big fast, right? And
Yep.
that's where they burn out real quick, because they just burn through money. Usually it's other people's money, and
Right.
which is what we've been seeing for the last, I don't know, since SaaS has been really hot, I'd say since at least 2015. It's probably
Right.
peak when it started just going crazy and people are just getting free money. That's kind of like how the internet kind of started. The .com was just like that. Like people were getting money that they're like, they know something about the internet, give them money. So I think, people were seeing like, well, these guys aren't really earning a profit. And so that's where the money just sort of, shrinks back a little bit,
Right.
and people need to see that. But that's a whole nother side of the fence, though, is just sort of looking at that market and looking at the similarities of what's crossing into ours. But it's fun, man. It's great to sort of chat about business, and it's an aspect of the security industry that we don't talk a lot about. I mean, every single person, just about, if you're working for a corporation, these are all the big things that have had to happen, and you're managing security for them, and there's a lot of challenges with that. And then, of course, the companies that people work for, whether it's system integrators, whether they're global or regional, or same thing with distribution, any of those things that, having business, having those skill sets, understanding sort of big picture of how this stuff works is really important. And that you're basically, you have your own business embedded inside that one, if you look at it that way, where you can put sort of your own thoughts out there on LinkedIn and other platforms and start building that. And the people who've done it, it's really helped them, whether they're looking for just career advancement or going and starting a company. But it's good for the company while they're there. I've seen huge engagement for some of these companies that have, a subject matter expert.
If they're willing to co-opt it within certain parameters, right? That's the key.
That is the key. That's the biggest challenge of it, is getting people to, you can give them swim lanes, right?
Right.
So just don't go too crazy, stay within this, and we can get content out there. But anyway, it was great to talk to you, Tyler.
Likewise.
Thanks for jumping on, and we finally got a chance to kind of go through some of this stuff. Maybe next time we'll cover some other subjects, because I know with your background there's a lot to unpack. But this is really cool, just sort of giving people an idea of between, really it's LinkedIn when I say social, but LinkedIn and what we can do with that as a tool, and sharing our experiences and being a true, the word community is so overused.
It is.
So I'm trying not to, it's like, what other word can we use for that? So, but if you think about the security industry and the people that make that up, and just collaborating with one another and sharing information and being, that human intelligence, right? Where you're doing that. I think that's really the future, is sort of breaking out of these silos that we're in. And the only way to do that is to actually engage. So
yeah, and democratize information so that you have more thought injected into what we're trying to do, so that we can solve all the problems for our clients that we aim to solve.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Well, awesome. Well, thanks for jumping on. I really appreciate it. What we're doing with Defender, I'm sure you've kind of seen what we're building out here. What are your thoughts? What would you like to see on Defender, and share with everybody here?
So again, kind of alluding back to our conversation a little bit earlier, I think that a key opportunity for the security industry and how we're sharing multimedia information is starting to inject in some of those general human interest topics too. So we always have that, we weave in that security value and the value of what we do, but let's also do some things to where we can get general mainstream audience interested. Because if we can get the mainstream behind the security industry and get out of the backwater, that's where we can really push innovation and the relevancy and the future relevancy of the industry. So that's what I would say. Let's get that outside talent involved and interested in what it is we do, and maybe even bring some outside dollars in at some point too, right?
Right. That's great advice. Awesome. Thanks for chipping on, Tyler. I appreciate it. Have an awesome day.
Thanks, David.